And as it were, the organizers of this conference have been smart enough to get me out of the way and bring in a real pro, because he knows this space very, very well. The panel is about mindfulness and compassion. Oh, sorry, that was the wrong one. No, that's not what I meant to say. The panel is about mental health in our province, and what we're doing, how we're investing in it, how we're reacting to it. And I get to introduce our moderator, who is a passionate supporter of ties, as one of the board members. His name is Jerry Robitaille. I think you can see him up there on the screen. Let me tell you a little bit more about Jerry. He's the president of Asurgo Enterprises and a highly regarded business executive and corporate finance advisor. He focuses on a mix of leadership responsibilities, governance, and corporate finance mandates in his work. And it relates to things like acquisitions, management buyouts, infrastructure financing, all the stuff I don't understand, but I'm glad Jerry is here for us. Now, in his social life and community life, he's been involved in several not-for-profit organizations, including the United Way, local community associations, and of course, as a board member of TIES. Edmonton Community Living as well, and Calgary Recreational Hockey Association. Where do you find the time, Jerry? Amazing. He's got a bachelor's degree in finance and accounting from the University of Alberta, a dad of 2 kids, and recently celebrated his 25th wedding anniversary. So congratulations to you.
Thanks,
Jerry, I know you've got a whole bunch of panelists, most of which have joined us. I think we're still waiting. There's still traffic in Zoom land sometimes. So I'm going to pass it over to you to introduce your panel. If somebody squirts in at the end, that's okay. We've got a good hour. And then what I'm going to do is I'll give you a break at the end. I'll pick up the Q&A portion of the panel at the end and manage that. And then we'll say goodbye to our group. So over to you, Jerry Robitaille.
Great. That's very kind. Thank you, Ken. I'm assuming I'm coming through okay, technology-wise. It's good. Great.
It's perfect.
So we have a panel of 4, and it's my pleasure to introduce them. We also have a number of pressing questions that I think everybody will be quite keen to listen to what our esteemed panel has to say on it. So what I'll do is go through and I'd like to introduce each of the panelists, and then ask questions after that. So to begin with, the Minister Rajan Sawhney was elected to the Legislative Assembly of Alberta from Calgary Northeast in 2019. She was appointed Minister of Community and Social Services in April of that year. Now, prior to joining the Legislative Assembly, Ms. Sawhney worked as a senior position in oil and gas industry, so she certainly understands the economic engine of this province. The minister also received her MBA and has a degree in economics and political science from the University of Alberta. As an avid volunteer, Minister Sawhney served as Senior Vice President of the Sikh Society of Calgary and a director of its Guru Nanak Punjabi School, and she's a recipient of the Canada 150 Award bestowed by the YW Calgary in 2017. Minister Sawhney and her husband have 4 children. In her spare time, if that's possible, she enjoys reading, writing, playing sports, and she speaks Punjabi and Hindi. Also on our panel is Minister Jason Luan. Welcome. He was elected to the member of the Legislative Assembly for Calgary Foothills in 2019 as well. He previously served as MLA for Calgary Hawkwood. Minister Luan was appointed as the Associate Minister of Mental Health and Addiction in April of 2019. He and his wife have been married for 34 years. Minister Luan, I'll get there one day. And together they have 2 daughters. Graduating from the University of Calgary with a master's in social work in 1990, he has dedicated his career to public service, promoting healthy families, strong communities, and economic prosperity. He served in a variety of roles, provincial and municipal governments, including child protection worker, a social planner, a manager, and a senior counselor. He co-chaired the Immigrant Sector Council of Calgary for many years and served on the Calgary Council of Mental Health and Addiction. He's proud to have made a difference in many lives throughout his professional services and community volunteering, and he received the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Medal in 2012 for community service. Also on our panel is Ms. Karen Gosby. She's a community leader, strong provincial, national, and international advocate for change in mental health and addiction services. Having been exposed to mental health and substance abuse, both in her childhood and adult life, she has extensive lived experience. Ms. Gosby and her 3 children lost their husband and father, George Gosby, to suicide in 2017. After his death, Karen shared her family's story to encourage others to share their own. She has come forward as a powerful mental health advocate and supporter of community action to address the lack of resources and the lack of coordinated services to support families impacted by mental health and addiction. Finally, but not least, Dr. Rose Judy is a psychology lecturer at Mount Royal University here in Calgary and an aging and mental health advisor. She focuses on ethnic diversity, which is quite relevant, mental health stigma, which we'll talk about quite a bit and have during this conference, and successful aging. Dr. Judy is bilingual, English and Arabic, and as such, she believes that understanding the diverse backgrounds and needs of our community should be part of any mental health approach. Thank you so much to the panel for coming by and attending. What's going to happen is for the next 40 minutes, we have a number of questions which I'll be asking the various panelists. And at the end of that, our MC, Ken, is going to take questions from the audience, and he'll be taking those as we go through the first batch of questions myself. So welcome, everybody. Without further ado, I think what we'll start with is for Minister Sawhney and Minister Luan, if we may, let's have you address this question. If you could please share one of your greatest concern about mental health and well-being of Albertans, and I'll let you arm wrestle about who should start.
Minister Sawhney, go ahead.
Thank you, Minister Luan, and thank you, Jerry, for those great introductions of everybody who's joining us today. And I feel honored to be with such a diverse, educated, and very distinguished number of members on this panel today. So in answer to your question, and there's only one aspect that I will talk about that I'm concerned about. And as Minister of Community and Social Services, I have a very diverse portfolio dealing with the most vulnerable Albertans that you can imagine. So there are so many things that I see from a bird's eye view, but also very up close and personal as well. And I'll have to say that my background as an economist, somebody who slices and dices numbers, it's been very, very helpful to me in this role, because at the end of the day, it's all about forecasting in terms of what you're going to see in terms of more people needing help and resources. And it's also about understanding social rate of return. If you invest early on, it's better in the long run, not only from an economic perspective, but also from a moral and ethical perspective in terms of taking care of people. And this is all about cost avoidance. So just wanted to say that that is my perspective on how I dealt with ministerial issues. And it's been very fruitful and very insightful. Now, having said that, I've also spent a significant amount of time reaching out across the province to women, because we know that this pandemic has hit women disproportionately hard across the sector, particularly racialized women who have disabilities, particularly Indigenous women. And I have read all the reports that I could get my hands on, the RBC report. There's the Feminist Economic Recovery Report that was co-authored by the YW. The McKinsey report, which is very compelling because it talks about women who are in the workforce, who are already working a double shift. They were working outside of the home and they were taking care of the home, but now all of a sudden they're working a triple shift with all of the additional COVID-related responsibilities. So what I have seen across the board, it doesn't matter who I speak to, whether I'm speaking to the CEO of a stock exchange in a different province, or whether I'm speaking to an elder at First Nations communities, they all say the same thing. Women need strong minds and strong bodies because they are feeling so vulnerable right now at this point in history because they are overtaxed and overworked. And one lady I remember vividly said to me, she is a senior manager at an oil and gas company, but she had 4 counseling sessions as part of her benefits package, and she just went through some of her savings to try to get some mental health supports. And she said they're just not there to the extent that they need to be. And she was a woman of privilege. So imagine somebody who doesn't have that same kind of privilege, how would they get the supports that they need? And tied into this is the fact that we are seeing increasing rates of domestic violence. And in fact, if you speak to police services, and I was speaking to the chief of police in Edmonton, the frequency and the severity of these acts of violence are increasing exponentially. So this shadow pandemic is what it's called, is going to take on a very ugly face. And in addition to providing shelter supports and other kinds of supports, mental health supports are going to be key. And finally, I will say when it comes to women, so I'm interested in understanding how we can support women across the entire demographic, but we also have to think about mothers and children. And I know right now we have a working group in government that is looking at the impacts of the pandemic on children so that we have a better understanding of how parents can step in and help support them better. So this is, I think I've talked about more than one area, but this one area encompasses 51% of our population. And I think we're going to have many, many more discussions around this.
We'll allow that, Minister, to provide more than one. That's good. Thank you. Minister Luan?
Thank you, Jerry, and thank you, Honorable Minister Shawnee. How lovely to have a colleague share that passion for helping people, particularly in the mental health portfolio. Let me tell you this, when I was appointed for this responsibility, I lost a lot of sleep. This is a very difficult file to handle. And when you have colleagues like Minister Shawnee echo the sentiment and understand the importance of such issue, it sure made a team effort a lot more impactful and effective than your solo voice in trying to articulate the greater need there. I want to echo what she brought up about what's the #1 burning issue here. To me, Albertans went through a very difficult time. 5 years of economic downturn before we hit the pandemic. And of course, pandemic accelerated every aspect of the challenges we're all facing, not only economically, but created a social crisis. From mental health, mental wellness part, you can imagine the demand for service and the challenges that we're facing is over the roof. Just the early days when the pandemic started, the distress center crisis lines call volume has increased overnight 40 to 50% right away. And back then we knew we're facing with a huge challenge, how we can overcome this. But let me tell you this, my comfort is when we realize the challenge in front of us, but the same opportunity that we need to rejig how we do services, how we meet the needs there, and force us coming out of the box so that business as normal is no longer acceptable. Status quo is not going to get it. It forces us to come up with creative solutions how to do so. Minister talk about increasing access to mental health and double, triple barriers for some of the vulnerable populations. I myself is a newcomer. I lived through the times, when you have to adjust the cultural language, everything, challenges, barriers on top of whatever the medical mental health concerns you have. You can imagine how hard that will be. So to me, having creative ways to respond to the needs is the task on us. And I have to be very honest and proud to say that I've seen some of the solutions come to the table. Not only this conference, putting mindfulness as a approach that for self-care, for helping each other, for family support, for community support, is a meaningful way that everyone can do. Let me give you another example. The COVID challenges to us has drastically pushed us how to access service in a virtual approach. Virtual mental health, virtual therapy, 211, you name it. All of those, what we call online and virtual support, it wasn't there before. And I can attest to you, when I worked in the field as a social worker, many of you know that I spent about 28 years before I stepped into the political realm. At the time when I was still working on this, 211 was a dream. It's only available to Calgary and Edmonton. And there has been desires, how can we bring this to over the whole province? It's never accomplished until this COVID time. We double, tripled its capacity. And today, let me tell you this, doesn't matter where you are in the province, as a burden 24/7, you can access 211 service. And one more thing for our newcomer immigrant population. With 211, we also made it available that simultaneous interpretation can occur over 100 different languages. I actually, at one time after this announcement made, I polled my grandparents, my parents, and they are 85, 86 years old. None of them speak English. So I want to be purposely testing if this 211 simultaneous translation is working. So I had them dial 211, I'm just watching. It was funny, and they will go on and on talking in Chinese. The operator couldn't understand. But within a few, I think it was 35 seconds, they figure out this is a different language. They hook up with this remote interpretation. And then they brought the third party. They started to talk in Mandarin and connected to my parents. And then they started simultaneously translate one sentence after another, how they do that. So I literally watched that and putting my finger crossed, saying, hopefully the dollar we put into this is going to work. And it did. So I want to share that with our audience. With challenge comes with opportunity. We can get out of the box. We can create innovative ways of meeting the needs. So I want to thank our community partners, including Thai, for organizing this very unique mental health conference that focuses on mindfulness as the tool. Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you, Minister Luan, and really appreciate you sharing that very personal story. That's fantastic. And a lot of what both ministers talked about also ties into the next question, which I'll ask Mrs. Karen Gosby and Dr. Rose Judy to address. And as we all know, people are often reluctant to access the available services, some of which were just mentioned, because of stigma associated with mental health. So the question, Mrs. Gosby and Dr. Judy, what can be done to support Albertans to overcome that stigma and seek the help they need?
Are we wrestling over who's talking as well, or?
Go ahead, Karen.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you. Thank you so much. And thank you to both ministers, Jason and also Rajan. I really appreciate hearing a lot of the great initiatives and projects that have been done and continue to be done in our community. And thank you so much for Thai for organizing this. It's really I think very insightful and quite needed, especially during the time that everyone's experiencing quite a lot of challenges. So I think from my background and my own experience and interest, I'm a huge advocate, as Jerry had kindly stated, regarding providing mental health supports for ethnically diverse people, in particular people who are vulnerable, visible in terms of minorities and invisible, but also those who experience quite a bit of challenge with the regular barriers, I would say, like language and cultural or lack of cultural compatibility of the mental health services. I think one of the main things and the themes that have been addressed throughout this conference was really to do with being able to tackle the issue of stigma. And in particular, we have some cultures in which mental illness is associated with being crazy. And so you're either crazy or not crazy is basically how you're categorized in some cultures. And so I think breaking down those barriers by really educating and providing resources is and will be quite helpful, in particular addressing these resources and supports in the language and the culture that is compatible with the communities that you want to reach out to. But in particular, I think, and I see that a lot in research, is the trying to, I guess, support communities by addressing the topic of mistrust toward organizations and governments and services. So I think first and foremost, it is important to create a bridge between community and services, to build rapport, to build a mutual trusting relationships with those communities first. And then you can go in and use the resources and supports and tackle a lot of the challenges, of course, that they might experience. And so I think that's one of the main things that I find in my area is that the rate of mistrust is quite high, and the lack of compatibility, cultural and linguistic compatibility, is one of the main reasons why some cultures feel reluctant to access these resources and supports. So yeah, and so I'm very keen to see what else is being done in our community to tackle these issues. Over to you, Karen.
Thank you. And I want to thank the Ties. This conference has been wonderful. I learned a lot today, and I was very relaxed coming into this panel. Thankfully for the day of the speakers, it was a great lineup. And for everybody that has spoke before me, Minister Sani and Luan and Dr. Jody, I mean, you guys have such valid points. Mine's going to go on more of a little bit of a personal angle. And I think for people to, really overcome stigma, I think we have to have the difficult conversations. And I mean, you guys are all really sort of very knowledgeable in the areas that you study or that you reside over. But I guess from a family member, I think just talking about it and bringing these conversations, sort of normalizing it, will reduce the shame and stigma attached to it. Because quite honestly, everyone knows someone that has experienced some kind of mental illness. It's in every household. And the more conversations we have, it will increase the public awareness and reduce that shame and stigma that, is basically, I want to say, very common behavior. So I was having a conversation on Tuesday morning with a 70+ Southwest Asian first generation immigrant. And we were discussing her life experiences that were similar to mine. She was managing her family's members' addiction and domestic violence that she had personally endured all over the years. And I asked her why she continues to keep it secret. And she said it was different in her culture. She needed to protect herself and her family from the shame that they carry. It's different in her community. And it made me think about the shame and the stigma and the hurt that we all discussed within my own family, which was a different community, with my children after my husband passed from suicide. And, they would come and we would discuss what happened in our household versus other households. And I would always say to my kids that you can't measure, and no one's bean counting from above what you're experiencing. You can't compare your own personal experiences, but what you can do is deal with it differently. And, you can either be a victim or a survivor. And it's not so much what's happened, but it's how you move forward. And with that, she said, well, why would I do that now? Like I'm at the end of my journey. And my answer to her was that you have to validate, like you have to just acknowledge what has happened. And by doing that, you're acknowledging your worth. But more importantly, we're mentoring healthy behaviors for our sons and daughters. And as long as we keep these stories hidden, that shame and stigma remains. So we have to do this for the next generation so they find the help they need sooner than we did. I mean, if we even have it all. And lastly, I really want to reinforce with the whole stigma thing, it takes days like this, having community leaders that are on this panel and that attended this conference, that were leading this conference, the politicians, teachers, doctors, policing, social influencers, anyone working with community to step up and be mental health advocates and drive cultural change through raising awareness, increasing an understanding around mental health for all communities, and especially for our growing newcomer population for Calgary, because it's growing fast and it's a big one. So things like this are just essential. And really, I want to give you a big thank you because it was fantastic.
That's great. It's interesting. Each one of our panelists touched in some way on the marginalized portion of our community, and I know Minister Luan and Dr. Judy, you actually, I and Karen as well, you had all touched on newcomers specifically, and I suppose maybe for Dr. Luan and Dr. Judy specifically, if you could. If you could share what solutions you think could be activated to encourage greater access to mental health services for Alberta's newcomers specifically, that'd be great. And maybe instead of arm wrestling, Dr. Judy, would you like to go first?
Thank you, I appreciate that. I don't think I'd win in an arm wrestle, to be honest. I wasn't really good at arm wrestling anyway, so thank you. It's a really good question to think of, and I think a really good heading to address in terms of action plans. I think of two things predominantly when I think about solutions. There is quite a lot out there that talks about the regular barriers, again, like addressing stigma and language barriers and cultural competency and awareness and compatibility. And I do agree with you, Karen, as well, that I think being able to acknowledge and talk about this topic is very important. But what I do like to add from my own experience working with marginalized populations, refugees and immigrants and older, ethnically diverse older adults, is that it probably would be helpful as a solution to diversify the supports and resources out there. It is not, and it should not be looked at a one size fits all. And I think if you look at quite a lot of our, in particular, our ethnically diverse older populations, addressing resources in a holistic, inclusive way is also quite important. Our assumptions sometimes are well intended, so there's good intention, assuming that we have the right resources and providing them to our community. But I think it's very important to be quite aware of our biases sometimes and our assumptions that we know what's best for people. I think it's very important for us to really include those individuals in the planning component of the supports and resources. So to involve them in that, I think is so important. And it's a really good way of engaging communities so they feel like you are actually genuinely invested in their interests, as opposed to coming in saying we have the supports. So holistic inclusion, I would say, is quite important, because we will have people who want to include spirituality and religiosity, for example, in some of their treatments or some of their resources. And again, diversifying the supports, I think, is very important. There are really many ways, I think, that culture shows how it influences experiences. And you will find that some people, some communities, and some newcomers, they come from cultures in which they don't talk about emotional and psychological symptoms, and rather they talk about it in somatic physical symptoms. And so again, coming back to the supports, I think it's really important to understand where they come from and what best practices could be beneficial for them, and understanding that their challenges are very subjective to their experiences, and that culture and cultural values and cultural beliefs and religion and spirituality should all be incorporated in the solutions that we have for our newcomers who are struggling to integrate, who are struggling to overcome language challenges, who are struggling to find employment, for example, who are struggling to raise their children or look after their older family members. And so all of these struggles are out there in addition to the pandemic and isolation, of course. And in order for them to feel like they belong, it is important to engage and incorporate their values and their beliefs in all the supports and solutions. So that's where I would that's what I would suggest and recommend. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Judy. Mr. Luan, do you have some thoughts in that regard as well, please?
Of course, I have 2 points I want to share. First, I want to echo Dr. Julie's notion of taking a holistic, comprehensive approach, having multiple ways to address this challenge. In the coming days and weeks, you will hear more. Our government of Alberta is going to take on what we call a recovery-oriented continuum care model, shifting our services from the traditional system intervention, service utilization point of view to a person-centered approach that have wraparound service to meet the people's needs versus to how they access to our service. I want to credit the work done by people like Karen and Dr. Sally Zhao. They all sat on the Provincial Mental Health Advisory Council. They worked for the last 2 years very hard to recommend the government of Alberta to consider this transformational change. Karen and Dr. Zhao, just for a piece of early news, you'll be pleased to hear. I recently went to Cabinet, presented your recommendations for this transformational change. And in the coming days and weeks, you have great news to hear about the government is 100% behind you in moving to this direction. So thank you for that work. My second point is I want to share a personal story related to the subject, and I think the answer is within it. When I was appointed this new post, of course, it's an exciting time and so on and forth. On one of the family dinner time, I'm with my family, and some of you know my older daughter is in residential specialist medical doctor in Edmonton. Out of nowhere, she said, "Daddy, I have a question for you." I said, "Okay." She said, "I am a doctor, I'm a physician. So when people get sick, if you're physically ill, you got lots of natural empathy from people around you, giving you care packages and wishing you well, and your employer will give you a day off to go home and recover. It's very conducive for recovery." And she said, "Yet, if it's mental illness, it's a totally different world. It's like something wrong with you. Nobody talk about it. And as if there's something wrong with you." And she says, from a physician point of view, 1 in 5 Canadians at any given time suffer from one form or another of mental illness. No difference than the physical illness you're facing. When you got a flu, a bug, it's not your fault. But somehow if it's a mental illness, it's related to your stigma, And she said, that's not fair. Plus, it's not healthy to help the person to heal. Now, you're the minister. How are we going to do this to change this? So I must say that I wasn't prepared to have that at me in my family dinner table, but boy, it was a real question. And for a few seconds, I don't know what to say. And then I said, honey, you're right. But I don't know I have the solution though. One thing I think I realized right on that moment, our younger generation have a much open mind in terms of acceptance for new knowledge, move on to support that's needed, openly talk about issues that is existed in our community and in our family. We're sitting at a family table with 4 generations, my parents, Feng and I, and my 2 lovely daughters. I can tell, I am probably slightly better than my parents talk about mental illness, mental health. I can tell you from to today, if you talk to her and my mom and dad to say, perhaps you need some help to see a psychiatrist, psychologist, they're going to say, you're crazy. I'm good. I don't need that. But that's not to say they don't struggle with anxiety, depression, isolation. I vividly see them suffering during this COVID time. Let me tell you that. So that put me to this question. I don't believe I know all the answer. I don't believe government alone can solve the problem. But I do believe if we faithfully, honestly face the challenge, work together, perhaps we can get over this, not because one is smarter than another, because collectively we have better wisdom on the table. By the way, when I shared this story at a later time at a student summit with Minister LaGrange, with high school students, there's a provincial youth leadership summit. I shared this story. I said, I'm pleading on your help, the younger generation, to help me help my ministry to talk about mental health, to make it normalized, to remove the stigma. And can you take the challenge and join me in doing so? It created a huge echo there, and they are definitely enthused to do so. So here goes my thought. Regarding to stigma, regarding to normalize this, regarding to openly talk about it and put it into a normal human need, we need our younger generation to lead us on this.
That's great. Thank you, Minister Luan. That is very powerful statement. And I know when Minister Shawnee opened the conference, she used the term caring community, and I think that's caring at all ages. And in fact, perhaps for the next question, Minister Shawnee, you also used a phrase, I don't know if you coined it, but you called it shadow pandemic. And I know Tom Heath in an earlier session talked about just a staggering increase in loneliness and isolation. And I wonder, Mr. Shawnee, if you could maybe talk to us a little bit about how we can mobilize culturally aware responses to these impacts of COVID-19 specifically, please.
Yes, thank you. And I did not coin that phrase. It was coined by the UN. It's a worldwide phenomena. It's a pandemic, and it's called the shadow because it's hidden away from the light, following closely behind the COVID-19 pandemic. And the other phrase that I did not coin is the echo pandemic, which relates to the mental health impacts that we're seeing. They are called an echo because they are behind the pandemic, but they are there. And if you listen really carefully and observe really carefully, you'll see it. There's a couple of things that I want to say about this. We actually have real life experience in mobilizing supports for ethnocultural communities, but I just want to address some of the things that I heard the other panelists say. I mean, Dr. Judy, when you talk about holistic inclusion and cultural and linguistic compatibility, that was something that we realized early on that we had to incorporate at a very real level, particularly in Northeast Calgary. That is where we have the highest cases, even today, the cumulative cases of COVID-19 active cases, and we have the second highest active cases right now. So that area of the city was hit really hard because we have a lot of frontline workers and essential workers who work there who are represented by newcomer and ethnocultural communities. So early on, we knew that our response, and it was actually guided by our premier as well as Mayor Nenshi, we knew that they had to be culturally sensitive supports in nature. And then the other aspect that I just want to highlight again, which Karen had said, which was so poignant, is that we need to be able to model for others what it means to ask for help. And it doesn't matter who you are, what background you come from, what your age is, your sexual orientation. Asking for help is always difficult. And Minister Luan talked about his multi-generational family, and I have a multi-generational family as well. And I can tell you that it's not always perceived as a strength. Sometimes it's perceived as a weakness, but we know, everybody on this panel knows, asking for help is always a strength. In terms of the supports and how we mobilize them, well, TIES is a very significant partner. We liaised with immigrant service agencies, the Calgary Centre for Newcomers, we have Action Dignity, and a plethora of other social services that really understood the newcomer and ethnocultural communities, and they understood that we needed to jump beyond those linguistic barriers. So we had a lot of supports translated into different languages. We were able to provide income support to some families who couldn't feel they could take time off work to recover because, you know, it's money, it's your weekly pay, how are you going to support your family? And there was no other recourse but stepping in at that time and providing isolation hotels. This was all in response to the different needs of different cultural communities. Now, having said that, we built this beautiful infrastructure and we had volunteers and social service agencies, but there were still gaps that we never could have anticipated. And I'll tell you, the one gap that even those who are seasoned in this field never really saw was response of some of the communities from East Africa. They said to us, and they said to me specifically, that our people don't like asking other people for help. They will talk to their community leader. They will never call a 1-800 number. They will never talk to somebody who is not known to them because they don't trust them. And Dr. Judy had alluded to that as well. So we quickly had to build a side infrastructure where we provided some funding to the East African Black community. So they had their own way to deal with members in their own community in a more intimate, in a relational fashion to make sure that those members were getting their supports. Now, we have learned a lot through this, and we have seen things that we can't unsee. There are tremendous vulnerabilities in certain communities, and as we move forward, I think there are supports that we have in place that were designed for COVID, but will have to stay in place for the near term or even the short term or even for the next 5 to 10 years, because we have a long way to go. And as it pertains to mental health supports, I feel like we were already in an epidemic situation prior to COVID-19, but I feel like we've taken about 5 or 6 steps backwards and we've discovered a whole plethora of other issues that have to be tackled. It sounds very gloom and doom, but I think talking about it, shining a light on it, spotlighting it, and really understanding that there's a lot of work to be done and it takes a village. It truly does. You know, it's such a cliche, but it's time tested and true. It's going to take all of us coming together and collaborating to make a dent.
Thank you, Ms. Rashani. That is so true. We could, of course, go on quite a while. We have time for one more question, and before Ken asks questions that have come in, and Karen, perhaps if I could direct it to you, and I know the term earlier was used that I really like, cost avoidance, and it's somewhat related to this, which is, in your view, Karen, your experience, what other preventative mental health initiatives do you think could improve the well-being of Albertans?
It's a great question. And when I get asked that, I say there's 3 things. And the first is, and I'm going to add 4 now because of this pandemic, but it's educate, educate, and educate. And then the 4th, which is almost equal on all three of them, is connection. And the connection part we really saw through the pandemic with people being isolated, being stuck at home. But we have to get these people like that. We're trying to sort of implement these prevention things when they're small. And with the city strategy, we started to think of them in 3 buckets: being well, finding help, and staying safe. And where can we get them? And it was like anywhere you go in life, at home, at school, at work, in the community, and just amplify that messaging. It has to be everywhere. Just educate and advocate. That's my tagline. And sometimes I say it so much I feel like Donald Trump, but I can't reinforce that enough. I mean, I shouldn't make that comparison, but it just really, honestly, I think days like today and having these discussions, it really gets those messages out there, and hopefully we can bring it down the stream and start doing this at younger age, and building awareness all over.
Great, thank you so much. This has been fantastic, and I know I've certainly and learning a lot, and couldn't agree more. The theme running through seems to be, let's be open, let's talk, let's share, and let's communicate. And that's great. Ken, I'm assuming you have some more questions for our panel.
I do. What an amazing discussion. Thank you very much, Jerry, for leading it. And thank you for Ties for obviously bringing this all together. It was obviously very important to the agency, and we've all benefited from the fruits of it today. More on that in a minute. But I'm going to start with, I'm actually going to take one question and use the rest of our time to extrapolate it, because I think it's quite meaningful. Minister Sawhney, maybe I'll start with you, but everybody kind of think about what you want to say, because I think this would hopefully be a hopeful note to end on. What is your best hope, Minister Sawhney, for how the work we're all collectively doing now, today, around mental health will benefit Albertans tomorrow? If we can do this right, especially at this moment when it's so important, coming out of what really was a mental health crisis, I think, for the entire community, what does that best hope look like? And when you go to the cabinet table and are talking around the budget, what do you hope you can accomplish for the citizens of Alberta around mental health?
So I love this question, and my answer will be somewhat unconventional. And I can say from an operational perspective, my best hope is that people set aside their love of their personal domains and their personal areas of, I guess, where they rule and where they operate, and really come together and collaborate, because we know that the issue is very real. It's escalating. We probably don't even have a good handle on what the post-pandemic realities are going to be as it relates to mental health. And there is no time to muck around. Resources are limited. They will be there. Minister Luan is going to be putting ample time and energy and resources into the mental health portfolio, but resources are always finite. And this is where we need the social services sector to come together and really link arms and collaborate, and not worry so much about who's doing what and who's taking care of what aspect and which personality doesn't agree with such personality. I don't mean to pick on the social services sector. This is a reality everywhere in every realm of the economy and society. So I think if we come together with more collaboratives and more collectives where people are synergizing and sharing information and being really open about what they know and what we see, that will make the task a whole lot easier. So this is a message that I always deliver to my stakeholders. Like, when you come to me, I want to see a common voice and not to have 5 different messages, because the work is too critical. Thank you.
Yeah, very wise. Thank you, Minister Sawhney. Minister Luan, I'll ask you the same question in a slightly different way. What does success look like for you? Lives are at stake, as Rajan said, every day. What does success look like for you?
My thought is it takes a community to overcome the crisis that we currently face and beyond. It's not an issue of dollar. It's not an issue of knowledge. It's not an issue of a single piece of what don't work. I can tell you that from my professional years of social work, it's funny, when I graduated in the early 90s with a master's degree, I thought I know the whole world. I can go in and do the change. Pretty soon I discovered it didn't work. And one of the things didn't work, actually later on in my career, it became so vivid. We were trained at the time, so-called problem-solving approach. So you identify a deficit, a problem, you research, you got the best practice how to do that, and then you go implement that. For the half of my career, I thought that was the golden standard to go on with, until later on realized that doesn't work for human being, or not the most efficient way. That rational sort of science-based approach is one approach. It doesn't always do the trick. Later on, you probably all know the strengths-based, resiliency-based approach came to the table. And what a world of difference. It maximized potentials that human can have. Instead of focusing on the problem, we're focusing on our strengths. What each one of us bring to the world for our uniqueness, our unique contribution. How do we take that to apply that within ourselves, our family, our community, and together the world change? So that was a big aha moment in my professional career. And I became passionate about the strengths-based resolution from there onward. Whether when I'm chairing the Immigrant Sector Council at the time, people were saying we're the most divided sector in the world. We can put the throat on each other at any moment. But with that kind of recognition, it's possible over the time things get changed, and we accomplish great common goals there. I want to use the same today for the challenge we have. Once again, I want to give credit to experts like Dr. Julie talk about this, and the panel, the advisory committee that Karen and Dr. Sally Zhao was part of, is all telling us with this what they call recovery-oriented continuum care that focused on your strengths, focus on the uniqueness, what you have. Use the so-called protective factors, whether it's your relationship, your financial assets, education, your community connection. Use those to expand your power of influence to mitigate the risk factors. The more we have the protective factors, the resiliency we have with us, the more we can mitigate whatever the challenges come to us. So that's, I believe, what we need to go on with.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate that answer. Karen, I'll go to you next. You've talked about education, certainly in the work that you've done with the city, second to nowhere in the country, if not North America, on the strategy for the city. It's all about collaboration. So what are your hopes for not just making a dent, but for making a real difference as we move through this?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, my hopes, I've got a lot of hopes. But, I'm going to echo what Minister Lawan said. And, one of the real successes of that group getting together was, putting the person, we had to just keep being reminded the person's at the center, and there's a continuum of care that, they can find help at any age, in any stage. And I'm going to borrow Chief Dale McPhee. We've referred to him earlier on, where he basically said everyone's got to get together, because it's not just in the social sector, it's in policing, it's at the partners at City Hall, it's our provincial partners, it's everywhere that we have to co-create, co-design, these are his words, and co-evaluate. And I say that over and over again, but ultimately, I'm super excited that there may be an announcement coming forward or soon that Jason was sort of alluding to, with that person-centered continuum of care. And I think ultimately, just going back to what I was discussing right from the beginning, that people just have the freedom to come forward and discuss anything is my ultimate, what I want or my goal, because people just basically understand what is happening to them. You know, it's not hidden anymore to them or a loved one, and they know exactly where to go to get the help that they need in a system that is easier to access and use with the work we continue to do.
Thanks, Karen. Dr. Judy, what are you thinking?
Well, thank you so much for everyone sharing their thoughts. And you probably could see my head nodding quite a bit as everyone was speaking, because it all resonated with a lot of the things that I actually believe in. And I think, Minister Jason, you mentioned strength-based, and I was waiting for you actually to say that word because I'm thinking you're going to say it. And I absolutely agree with you, and of course with everyone on the panel as well. I think what's important is that we understand that, especially for newcomers and people who come from various diverse backgrounds, that cultural factors does influence the strategies and the approaches and how much people would like to include and involve outside resources versus community. And I think cultural factors predominantly are important for many ethnically diverse or diverse people, because with culture you'll find that people sometimes would rather resort to their own community, their families, their close-knit networks, as opposed to the outsiders. And I think that's what resonates a lot with the strength-based approach, is to empower people within their communities. And I think that was also something that was addressed in the panel as well, looking at communities from a strength-based approach and not a deficit lens. A deficit lens is also something that we're hearing quite a lot about. And so when you look at people from a deficit lens, you're looking at what they do not have, what they are missing, and we come as heroes to save them, when in fact people would rather be empowered, feel that they have control, feel that they do have something to offer, and everyone has a form of resiliency and coping mechanisms. And it's really up to us to help them, to compassionately and empathetically encourage them to discover their own sources of strength and resilience. And so that is my hope, that we empower people as best as we can, because it will be not only beneficial for their generation, but also other generations to come as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those final words. What a terrific panel. Thank you to all of you for investing your time. I know, Minister Sani, you came back twice in the day, which there's not a ton of plus sides to COVID, but in the Zoom culture, you can run off and do the rest of your portfolio and then come back to us all in a day. And we sure appreciate that. Minister Lawan, thank you for your continuing service. Karen, you're an inspiration. I think I've told you that in person before. Every time I hear you talk, I see it the same way. And Dr. Judy, you're doing this at the front lines, and we do appreciate your leadership. That is your panel. Jerry, wonderful job. Next time you can host this thing. You're a natural, so that's easy. Thank you very much on behalf of Alberta Mind Biotech Corporation, and of course our host, the Immigrant Education Society. It was wonderful. Don't forget, the Mindfulness app from TIES is available for download. Thank you to Minister Sani for announcing that this morning. I've already been playing with it over the lunch hour. It's terrific. And coming soon in September, when it's safe to gather in that way, the Mindfulness Hut will be available at TIES office up in Whitehorn. That is our show. Thank you. I'm hoping you has learned as much as I did. Be safe, be well, be mindful. I'm Ken Lima Coelho. Thanks again.